In 2007, director David Yates gave the world his first of 4 takes on the magical world of wizardry.
In 2021, we returned to a Buffalo Trace flagship brand that we've had an iffy history with.
The film is Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix.
The whiskey is Blanton's straight from the barrel.
And we'll review them both. This is
the Film and Whiskey Podcast. Welcome to the Film and Whiskey Podcast, where each week we review a classic movie and a glass of whiskey. I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And this week we are looking at the 5th movie in the Harry Potter franchise, The Order of the Phoenix.
Every memory he has access to is a weapon he can use against you. You won't last 2 seconds if he invades your mind. You're just like your father. Lazy. Arrogant.
Don't say a word against my father.
Weak.
I'm not weak.
Then prove it. Control your emotions. Discipline your mind.
Brad, for people who are newer to the podcast, the way that we've been doing the Harry Potter series, we've been walking through it 2 movies at a time. And, you know, just a peek behind the curtain here, Film and Whiskey. It took a lot of planning and strategery on our part to figure out exactly the perfect number of Harry Potter movies to do each season. We didn't want to do 1 at a time because it would take 8 years to get us through that. We didn't want to do 4 at a time because then it just seems like we were becoming a Harry Potter podcast. So we figured 2 per season would be a nice average. We started this back in season 2. We're now moving into the 5th and 6th movies in this franchise. Brad, we're on the back half of Harry Potter now.
Yeah, Bob, I am not going to lie. Coming into the Harry Potter movies, I was really pumped because it's one of my favorite intellectual properties out there. Of the movies, I feel like I have watched the 4th and the 5th one the most, and the rest of them I hadn't really seen a ton. So I was happy that we were going through 2 by 2 and just kind of working our way through the catalog, because I just think that they're incredibly important movies, I think. Because when you look at the world of Harry Potter, it really captured an entire generation of children and young adults. And so the idea that these books were turned into movies that weren't just movies, but overall were pretty well-received, well-made movies, it just feels like an important cultural touchstone that we needed to talk about.
Yeah, Brad, the Harry Potter movies for me are almost more interesting to talk about than even like the Lord of the Rings movies. And I say that because the Lord of the Rings films are pretty much canonized by everyone. People love Lord of the Rings, and, you know, critically, they did incredibly well. The 3rd movie won 11 Oscars. They're staples of 21st century cinema. And Harry Potter is kind of right there in terms of having cultural cachet. But they're not as highly regarded, even by the general public. If you go on IMDb, I think the highest rated one has an 8.1, the lowest rated one has a 7.4. So it seems like most people really like the Harry Potter movies, but they're not quite as highly regarded as something like Lord of the Rings. And at the same time, they're not as, forgettable, I guess I would say, as something like the Hunger Games movies, which were all good movies. But I mean, when was the last time you had a conversation with anybody about the Hunger Games at this point? So Harry Potter's interesting. It has staying power. It has legs. But as a series of movies that most people seem to think are 3 stars out of 4.
Yeah, I mean, literally every single movie, except for maybe 1 or 2, like you said, are in the 7 range on IMDb, which pretty much is pointing to the fact that these are culturally beloved, but if you're not within the world of Harry Potter, already loving it, then you're probably not likely to give these super high scores.
Yeah, and I think that brings us to this movie. Before we jump in, I do want to give a quick plug for our Patreon page. You know, sometimes we talk about that towards the back half of the episode. I want to plug it right now, Brad.
Yeah, Bob, I think it's really important to let everybody know that things cost money. And as much as we love bringing this podcast, it is so incredibly helpful to bring you the content that you deserve, that Film and Whiskey Nation needs. So in order to do that, we rely on Patreon. There is 3 different tiers of subscription levels, $3 a month, $5 a month, $7 a month. You get all sorts of bonus content. You get episodes early. You get some content that is otherwise cut from a normal episode. It is an absolute blast. So check us out. You can go to patreon.com/filmwhiskey.
Brad, we have a fantastic episode lined up today between Order of the Phoenix and this really special sample of Straight from the Barrel that we're going to drink later on. But let's dive into the movie. All right, we are at Harry Potter number 5. We have a new director again who is going to finish out the series. David Yates takes over and he just rattles off 4 of them in a row. But Brad, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves here. It is time for Brad Explains, America's favorite segment, where Brad breaks down the plot of the movie that he has just seen, often for the first time. This is not your first time seeing Order of the Phoenix. And if I recall correctly, I think I remember you saying that Order of the Phoenix was among your favorites of the books too, right?
Yeah, I would say that this and probably Goblet of Fire are 2 of my favorite of the books. Like right in the core chunk middle of the series, I just love Goblet of Fire and I love Order of the Phoenix, especially. It might be my favorite of the books.
Well, I think we both have history with the book, and we'll get into that, but not until you give us a 60-second rundown of the plot of this movie.
Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix is a movie about Harry Potter. He is the titular character, and he is all alone. I think that's the key theme for the movie, is that Harry, at this point in his journey of life, feels all alone. And this is reinforced by the fact that he saw Voldemort come back and return, kill his friend Cedric Diggory, and now all the papers are denouncing him and Professor Dumbledore. And they're saying that they're crazy and lying. The Minister of Magic is trying to get him in trouble all the time. He survives an attack by Dementors. He saves his cousin Dudley, and he gets a trial out of it. And then he goes off to school, and all of his friends kind of hate him now, and they're not sure to trust him or not.
10 seconds.
And so we spend a year with Harry as he tries to figure that out. They find a prophecy about him and Voldemort, and he fights Voldemort off with love. Boom.
The end. Skipped a lot there. Skipped a whole lot there.
Nope.
But we're gonna get into it.
Didn't skip a single thing, Bob.
No, you didn't. Not at all. Brad, if you were the author of the Cliff's Notes on Harry Potter, I would sue you.
There is no disclaimer that this is actual helpful material.
I would fail every test.
See, here's the thing. This is another. I think that for me, the core thing I'm going to keep coming back to is that you can tell that this is David Yates' first go around at the Harry Potter universe.
Mm-hmm.
And which is interesting to say because I think that Chris Columbus knocked his first go around out of the park, didn't do so great with his second. Cuarón did a great job with his first one. Newell was an up and down experience that if you want to learn more about, go listen to our episode on Goblet of Fire. But with Yates, I feel like I can see the foundation of a really solid theme or artistic direction for the rest of the series, but it feels like he's still getting his footing.
Yeah.
And so when I have trouble describing this movie, I think it's because of 2 things. I think number 1, it's because the book's so damn big. Like, there's just so much that happens in these Harry Potter books. And when you combine that with the fact that Yates seems more interested in setting up themes and characters more than, like, the events of the books, I think it leads us to a point where the movie just feels a little bit jumbled, but it feels solid. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same place. And I'll say this at the outset, because I think that I'm probably going to be dumping on this movie a lot as we go. I don't think that any of the Harry Potter movies are bad. I don't want to give away my final score at this point, but I don't think any of them are bad. But I think, in my opinion, this might be the worst one. And I've kind of always thought that. And that even stemmed from when I read the book. I read all the Harry Potter books up to and including Order of the Phoenix. And what I found as I was reading Order of the Phoenix, and Brad, apparently you had a very different experience than I did, was that the book was so dense, but it was dense in a way that it seemed unnecessary. And that the first 600 pages of that 800-page book could have been condensed by at least half. And then the actual story really didn't seem to kick off until the final 200 pages of that book. And I thought it was such a slog to get through. And it just seemed like J.K. Rowling was trying to outdo herself from, the length of the fourth book. And it just became like a Don Quixote type thing where they were, it was a joke unto itself to read that much. And she just wanted to write a bunch of pages. And then the problem is, how do you as a screenwriter and how do you as a director condense something that big into what might be the shortest movie in the series? This is very short comparatively. I think it runs 2 hours and 18 minutes. And Brad, I just don't think they stuck the landing here. And I want to point out one thing you were talking about just a minute ago, which was the director of the fourth movie, Mike Newell. I thought we had a great conversation, Brad, about Goblet of Fire and how Mike Newell, his background was in pretty basic standard studio dramas and romantic comedies, and how so much of Goblet of Fire seemed like a mid-budget studio drama or romantic comedy. It seemed very inert. It didn't have much going on for it stylistically. We really loved the dragon sequences, but it just seemed like the moments of thrills were too little too late. And in this one, I feel like it's almost the opposite problem, where Yates comes out of the gate swinging for the fences, but what he's trying to do stylistically is so different from everything we've seen in the Harry Potter universe to this point that it's a little jarring, and it takes so long to get used to. And I think he kind of pulls back a little bit in 6, 7, and 8, but it really kind of leaves this movie, Order of the Phoenix, hanging out to dry, as like the scapegoat for all the things that he did wrong.
I honestly think you're coming across a little harsh on this one, Bob. I will agree with you that this is definitely not the best of the 8 movies. I might even say it belongs in like the 4th, 5th area, just kind of middle of the road. But for me, there are certain parts of this film that remind me of Cuarón, helming Prisoner of Azkaban. There's a shot near the start of the movie where he's like pulling through windows, and you're moving through time as the shot moves on. That reminded me of Cuarón near the end of the movie during the time travel sequence. There's a darkness to this movie that I feel like imitates what Cuarón was trying to do with the Dementors in the third film. So I think that there are parts of this that feel familiar, but you're right in saying that it's definitely a stylistic departure from a lot of the things that you saw in the earlier films. I think most notably the childishness of the earlier movies. Mm-hmm. There's not much in this film that feels childlike or endearing. I think Fred and George, shooting off fireworks in the Great Hall is probably one of the few moments. And even that is immediately followed up with Harry having another vision from Voldemort. And it, kicks off the final battle sequence, if you will.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I do want to go back to your comment on Cuarón and how this feels very familiar and similar to that. And I think I'm going to sound harsh talking about this movie. It's not that I hate the movie. It's not that I think it's a bad movie. And by the end of the series, I honestly think David Yates does a very admirable job. And he definitely handles the fact that these books go from being very childish and childlike to incredibly dark by the end of the books in the series. However, I also think that in a lot of ways, David Yates is trying so hard to correct what went wrong in the fourth movie that he's like, hey, remember Alfonso Cuarón? I can do camera shots like that. You know what I mean? And it seems like discount Cuarón at times in the same way that J.J. Abrams made a movie called Super 8. I don't know if you ever saw that movie. And it was very much his homage to Spielberg. And it had everybody saying, he's the next Spielberg. But having watched as many Spielberg movies as we have now, Brad, it's really apparent when you watch that movie that it's like he understands the look of a Spielberg movie and the kinds of shots you're supposed to compose. And, I guess you'd call it like the iconography. But he can't pull off the shots the way Spielberg does. He doesn't have those super long oneers that we talked about with Spielberg. And it's the same thing here. Like, I actually took down a note that I think this might be the most gifable of the 8 movies. There are just like really quick moments, especially when Harry's having his dream sequences. And there's this one great shot of like the black tile on the wall and Voldemort's hand just kind of creeping in. It's a beautifully composed shot, but it's like, a second and a half long. And I feel like this movie has so many little iconic moments like that, but it doesn't add up to like as cohesive of an experience as Azkaban did for me.
See, it's interesting. I think that part of the disconnect that you might be feeling, for me, the entire theme of this movie is loneliness. And I'm curious to watch the rest of the movies to see if Yates kind of ties it around a character theme the way he does in this one. But the way that you view Harry in this, and honestly, I think the reason I love the book so much is because in the Order of the Phoenix, you find Harry finally starting to question why this is all happening. You know, he's finally seen someone die, you know, with Cedric Diggory at the end of the fourth book. And he's starting to question, like, why is all this happening? Why is all this darkness and suffering and brokenness here? And as a 16-year-old, he gets depressed. He gets lonely. He feels like not only is the entire outside world out to get him, but he's starting to feel like his inner circle is also mistrusting him. And he feels estranged from Ron and Hermione and Dumbledore, his closest allies. And so for me, I think that's why this movie, while I agree that there's a certain choppiness to it that I think the amount of content forces upon the movie, I feel like it actually fits well to show how, like, Harry is barely able to keep himself connected to the world around him when he's feeling so much inner turmoil within himself.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. And I really agree with what you're saying. I think that the thematic elements of this movie, the themes of the movie, they are, they get through pretty well. But I almost feel like, Brad, you and I are talking about two different things, which is, the themes of the movie versus the actual craft, the filmmaking aspects. Because, if you put Alfonso Cuarón as the director of this movie, it's just a better movie, right? I mean, like, I don't think either one of us would argue that. If you put, Denis Villeneuve as the director of this movie, it would be in another galaxy, right? It's just, there's something about the way Yates makes this movie that kind of irks me. And it's really apparent from the very beginning. It's just so ugly. It's an ugly looking movie aesthetically. It has this, like, the first few scenes where they're in, where Harry's still living on Privet Drive, and it has this, like, pea green filter over everything. It is this sickly, sickly color. And I understand, like, we are taking a turn into darker thematic material here, but it just seems like Yates is kind of gleefully like, we're going to do something totally different and you better be on board. And it's the way it's edited where, the sky's getting dark and Harry and Dudley are like, what's going on? And then the very next cut, it's a jump cut and they're like running down the street. And we've never seen a scene cut that way in the whole Harry Potter universe. Like, I've never seen anything like that. And it is very, very jarring. And I think part of the problem is they don't continue that style of editing in the rest of the series, and it didn't happen before. And it really, whether it's a good choice or a bad choice, I think the kind of curse of this movie is that, like I said earlier, it was left hanging out to dry. It was almost like they sent it out into the world, they got back some negative notes on it, and then they said, all right, we're not going to try that again. And so, like, maybe it would have been really cool to see David Yates continue that style of editing and that style of cinematography throughout the last few movies. But it just seems like he came in really hot, and then whatever it was, maybe Warner Brothers came in afterwards and kind of cooled him off a little bit. And it makes this movie this kind of weird artifact that none of the other movies really look or feel like this one.
Yeah, I don't know, Bob. That's just fascinating to me. I love the opening of this movie. I like the aesthetic of it. I enjoy the darkness. I enjoy the filter of giving it this, like, heat, followed by all this darkness, and it's offset with the coldness of the Dementors. For me, the opening of this film feels like such a departure from the rest, and that feels appropriate to me because it models what he's trying to build with this theme of Harry being alone. So I guess for me, the aesthetic of this movie didn't really bother me much. I think he has some really beautiful shots throughout, which I know you said that you saw a few of them as well, but for the most part, I don't really see many issues with his cinematography, the art direction, things like that. I think really laid a foundation for where he was going with the next, 3 films.
So going back to what you were talking about earlier, what I do love about Order of the Phoenix is that this really feels like the turning point of the whole series. And so in a way, I mean, kudos to you, David Yates, because you made the movie look very different as it's taking a very different thematic turn. But Goblet of Fire was very, very dark. And I think even as we were talking about it on the podcast, we said this seems like, the turning point of the series. And it kind of is. But I think you really hit the nail on the head, Brad, in that the fifth movie and the fifth book is where Harry stops asking, like, what is going on outside of me and starts asking what's going on inside of me. Why do I feel so tormented? Why do I feel, why am I having these insane dreams? Why do I feel like I am being tormented by something that is external to me? And kind of taking that interior turn, I think really helps the series overall. Because there's only so many times you can see Voldemort show up and fight Harry before it becomes a bit repetitive. And so I think having the terror be inside of Harry the whole time, it makes it feel more personal. In a way, it makes it a lot more creepy, and there's a lot more horror elements going on there. And so, just in case you thought that I was only going to crap on this movie, Brad, I really do appreciate that aspect of it.
The funny thing of you saying that, Bob, is that I agree with you that it's healthy for the movie to take an inward turn for Harry. But the fascinating thing to me is that for the most part, other than Dumbledore, I think that the Harry Potter series is one of the best cast movie, series of all time. And so this movie, I found myself struggling for the fact that you barely see any of the other characters in this movie.
Yeah.
Like, literally, Harry dominates the screen time in this movie. Like, you get Hermione and Ron a decent amount, but other than that, Dumbledore's barely in it. McGonagall's barely in it. Hagrid's barely in it. Like, there's literally almost nobody else who has any serious amount of screen time other than Harry. And for me, that was an area where this movie suffered, is this idea that, and they say it at the end of the movie, like, Harry says to Voldemort, like, you're wrong. Like, I am the one who's going to win because of my family, because of the people around me. But Yates just spent the entire movie kind of relegating them to the side.
Yeah.
Which was just interesting to me.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think that is one of my big notes on this movie is how much everyone else just seems like set decoration. Like, there's even Sirius. And I think this is like one of my bigger things I wanted to get into later, but I think it's a good point to talk about it now. When you read the books, I think you understand Harry's relationship with Sirius much better than in the movies, because he shows up in the third movie, and it just, even a complaint I had with that movie was that Harry just immediately falls in love with the guy. Like, he just loves Sirius. And then Sirius really isn't in the fourth movie at all, except for when he's talking to him through the fire. And then he comes back for the fifth movie. And I think one thing that David Yates does really badly is that he really broadcasts Sirius is about to die. Do you know what I mean? Like, if this was a horror movie, you'd be shouting at the screen like, oh, he's going to get it next. Because every time he interacts with Sirius, like, Harry will leave the screen and then he'll just leave Sirius standing there awkwardly for like 5 seconds as a reminder, like, hey, here's Sirius again. It's Cuarón's fault, it's Mike Newell's fault, and it's David Yates' fault. I don't think that they did a good enough job developing the Harry and Sirius relationship for it to have the weight and the gravity that it should have when he dies at the end of the movie. And part of that is, again, like I said, it's the 3-movie arc not being very good. But part of it is also what you're referring to, which is that they just don't do a very good job in this film of developing any other character besides Harry.
Yeah, I mean, there's the classic TV trope and movie trope that Haley and I have dubbed, like, never make a promise. Because, like, as soon as anyone makes a promise in any form of media, we immediately like, oh, they're going to die.
Yep. Oh, and he's so obvious with it in this movie, too. He's like, Harry, we'll be a family. We'll have a house on the beach. We'll pick up seashells together. It's like, oh, my gosh, dude. Like, could you be any more obvious about the fact that you're going to get murdered?
Yep. And then right as they finish saying that, they, like, zoom in at this, like, Dutch angle on his family portrait that's been blackened out. And this ominous, like, horn plays, in the background. You're just kind of like, oh, yep, he's going to die. Bye-bye, Sirius.
Well, and that's a question that I had for you because, Brad, it's been, nearly 20 years since I've read these books. Is is Sirius in all the scenes in the books that he's in the movie? Because I had this weird sense that they were kind of shoehorning him into situations that he just didn't belong in. And you kind of got that vibe too. Like there's a scene at Christmas time where, they're hanging out with the Weasleys and they're at this long table and everyone's, just sitting opening Christmas gifts. And then Sirius comes in the other end of the room and is just standing very awkwardly away from everyone else. And it's a very weird scene to shoot because they have to keep cutting back and forth because they can't fit everyone in one shot. It just seemed like, oh, is Sirius even really supposed to be in this scene? Because it just seems like we're trying to give him some more screen time before we kill him at the end.
I'm like 90% sure that every scene they have him in this movie is a scene in the book that he was actually in. So I'm pretty sure at Christmas he was there. Because in the book, he is pretty much stuck at the Order of the Phoenix's headquarters, his old house. So I'm pretty sure that he is there at that point. But if there are any Potter fans out there that have more recently read the book than I, go ahead and call me out. Feel free.
All right, Brad. Well, I think we should probably talk about the acting in this movie. We've talked about the direction enough, that's for sure. I think that Daniel Radcliffe is really, really good in this movie. And we had some complaints, some notes on his acting in the fourth movie. If nothing else, David Yates knows how to direct Daniel Radcliffe. And that's what really makes this, in my opinion, that's what keeps this from actually becoming a bad movie, is that it really hangs the weight of the film on Daniel Radcliffe's shoulders. And he does a pretty admirable job, in my opinion.
If you ever make a movie, this is just a note to anybody in Film and Whiskey Nation who's going to make a movie someday. If you ever make a movie about kind of a tortured soul questioning their existence and their place in the world and really make kind of a mind drama, make sure that you have a really good actor and a director who can work with that actor as your main character. Mm-hmm. Just make sure you get a good performance out of them, because if you're going to spend 2 hours out of your 2 hours and 18 minutes with them, then the audience should want to watch them. And I think Daniel Radcliffe does a great job with that. I think in this one, you really see Daniel Radcliffe getting to do what a lot of actors want to do, which is play a tortured soul. And really, I think he knocks it out of the park overall. I don't really have any complaints about him the way that I did in the last film.
So I want to go into one other person, because like we said, most of the characters in this movie are essentially just set decoration, except for Dolores Umbridge, who is a new character to the series. And if we're being honest, I think that there is the actress playing Umbridge, Imelda Staunton. She had just come off of an Oscar nomination for a movie called Vera Drake. This was like her big splashy Hollywood movie. And I think that it would be way too easy to say that the way the character is portrayed in the movie is a failure and it is her fault. And I'm going to kind of stick up for her the way I stuck up for Michael Gambon when we first started talking about him as Dumbledore. Because if you read the book, if you look at the drawings, the original drawings in the book, she is very frog looking. She looks trollish. That's not how she looks in this movie. She's very prim and proper. And I think that she actually plays the character really well for what I think she was being told to do. But at the end of the day, I still think that the way David Yates chose to portray that character did not do justice to what was in the book.
I think you're just flat out wrong, Bob.
Oh, good. Well, good.
No, I think that based on how she's written in the book, she is written as this evil, conniving, controlling, manipulative bitch. There's no other way to say it. And I think she does a phenomenal job of doing that.
Nothing.
That's right. Because you know, deep down, you deserve to be punished. Don't you, Mr. Potter?
I think that they nailed the aesthetic. I think that they, with the choices that are there that are a little bit different. Well, see, now that I'm thinking about it, I need to go back and read the book. I think that she did have an obsession with pink in the book.
Oh, maybe that's true. And again, I think maybe I'm just being influenced by those little, illustrations that were included in the original book at the beginning of each chapter, because I remember her looking not like she looks in the movie.
Yeah. No, I mean, I know. I can see in my mind's eye, exactly the picture that you're saying. And she does kind of look toadish. But I think that the way that they shoot her to make her appear so short, the costuming for her, like the way that they gave her those like really straight lined, like tweed jacket type thing, I think that kind of emphasizes her like blockiness. Like I'm sure she isn't actually the shape of like a rectangle, but that's how it appears in the movie. And so I just think that they knocked her out of the park. I think Dolores Umbridge is one of the worst parts of the movie. Like she is meant to be hated. If there was a WWE wrestler in the Harry Potter universe, it would be Dolores Umbridge. Like she is the easiest person to hate that everybody wants to hate, and she feels over the top, but it just works. And I think it works because of the way that Imelda Staunton plays her.
Yeah, Brad, I'm actually really happy and surprised to hear you say that, because I thought we were going to get into like another Michael Gambon type of argument.
Oh no, we're
here.
going to get back into Michael Gambon. Don't you worry.
I do want to make one more point about Umbridge, though, and that is, I think that this is one of those areas where the way that Rowling wrote the book, I don't know if Umbridge needs to be as big of a character as she is, because she just seems like, I don't want to call her a MacGuffin. She's not a MacGuffin, but ultimately like a non-starter. You know what I mean? Like most of what she does doesn't really have a lot of effect on the point of the movie. Like it's all plot stuff. I understand that. I understand the oppressive nature of Hogwarts. I understand the themes they're trying to communicate. Like I understand what you're doing, J.K. Rowling, but it almost seems like we just have this really jarring shift, 7/8 of the way through the movie, where it's like, all right, now she's no longer the villain because she was so easily defeated. And oh, remember Voldemort? He's here now. And I almost feel like giving her so much emphasis kind of took away from Voldemort. Like he shows up and I was like, oh yeah, I forgot Voldemort's here. And I didn't feel the sense of like him looming over the movie as much as I should have, because I feel like they just gave way too much attention to Umbridge.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's part of the issue with the massive amount of content. You're supposed to get this sense of horror of what Voldemort is doing through the lessons in occlumency that Snape is giving Harry. And you're supposed to have more of an impact from these dreams and how they're affecting Harry. But those types of things are best represented through knowing the main character's thoughts. And you just can't know the main character's thoughts in movies unless you have him like narrating his thoughts, and so it just works better in book form to have his Voldemort in the background rather than in a movie. It just doesn't have the same impact. So yeah, I'm right there with you where it feels like Dolores is set up as this, bad, evil enemy that gets run off by centaurs in the end. And you're like, oh wait, like no, Voldemort is the true enemy here.
All right, I have one more scorching hot take before we go to break, because we need to drink this whiskey here.
All right.
So I don't think it's any secret that Harry and Ginny have zero chemistry, right? Like that's something that all fans agree on, that, I'm glad they cast who they casted in this movie, but they have no chemistry. And also Harry and Cho Chang have zero chemistry. And that, like, therein lies the rub, because the only person in this movie that Harry has real chemistry with, like romantic chemistry, is Luna Lovegood, who is not someone that Harry is supposed to be romantically interested in. But they have a couple scenes that are very kind of tender and charming and heartwarming. And it just seems like, in some ways, Harry and Luna understand each other on a level that really no one else understands them. And in a movie where it is like the point of the movie is that no one understands what Harry's going through, even Ron, even Hermione, you have this character of Luna who really does understand Harry. And it made me kind of want to write like fan fiction. Do you know what I mean? Like it really made me want to be like, wow, these two should have ended up together, because as kooky as she's supposed to be, she's an outcast too, and she understands Harry on a level that it seems like no one else really does.
Well, and that's the whole point, right? That when nobody else understands Harry, oh wait, he does have someone understand him, but it's kind of the crazy girl that everybody likes to make fun of and has no friends. like even that is supposed to emphasize the loneliness that Harry is feeling. So I'm with you. I love the moments that he has with Luna. I don't find them to be as like romantic. I don't think that the chemistry sparks in that specific manner. I think it for me, I just love the fact that Harry and Luna so quickly have an easy friendship. You know, like in the first few movies, the important thing to establish is that Harry, Ron, and Hermione are friends. And I think that the chemistry between Radcliffe, Grint, and Watson is just spectacular. And so it's cool to see him develop that, and not him, Harry Potter, but like him, Daniel Radcliffe, develop that with Luna Lovegood this late into the series. I will disagree with one thing, though, Bob. I do not think that Luna is the only person he has chemistry with. I think that him and Hermione 100% have chemistry
for sure.
in this movie. And I will just once again get up on my soapbox and say Harry and Hermione are the clear and obvious couple, and Ron can go kick rocks because he freaking sucks.
Totally agree. But I guess what I'm saying is, like, I don't think they really gave Harry and Hermione much of a chance for sparks to fly in this one the way that they definitely did in Goblet of Fire.
Oh, yeah.
And I almost feel like maybe it was accidental that Luna and Daniel Radcliffe just kind of click as actors, but their scenes were, I mean, maybe it's just a low bar. Their scenes were significantly less awkward than his scenes with the actual people he was supposed to be romantically interested in.
Yeah, Bob, I could go on and on and on about Harry and Hermione and the beauty that their relationship should have been and is in my mind. But in order to do that, I need some whiskey, so let's go ahead and drink this Blanton straight from the barrel.
Let's get to it, Brad. All right, today we are checking out Blanton's Straight from the Barrel. Now, if you've been a longtime listener of the podcast, you know that Brad and I have had a pretty checkered history with the Blanton's brand. Blanton's is one of those brands from Buffalo Trace that has been incredibly marked up, that people chase for no reason. And it's really hard to get your hands on a bottle of Blanton's. And so we started with their baseline offering, which is just their regular single barrel. That was a sample that we got from our friends Bourbon and Stuff. And that thing was the most alcohol-forward whiskey Brad and I have ever had. Now, I've had other people write in and say, hey, there's a lot of variation from barrel to barrel with Blanton's, but that's kind of part of the problem. You don't want that much variation. We then tried Blanton's Gold, which used to be an international only release and is now being sold in the US, and loved it. We loved that whiskey. And so today we're moving on to Blanton's Straight from the Barrel, which is kind of like the next step up from Blanton's Gold. This also used to be an international only release. It just started being sold in the US last August at a suggested retail price of $120. Obviously, if you go on Google and you look for Blanton Straight from the Barrel, it's selling for like $499 because it's allocated and it's Buffalo Trace. Brad, I will say, if I can throw a wrench into things, this sample that we have today from Bourbon and Stuff is from a bottle of Blanton Straight from the Barrel that was dumped in 2002. So the bottle itself that we're drinking is 20 years old. This is an incredibly special pour. And Brad, you know, just from what I've heard about the old distilleries that Buffalo Trace used to use versus what they're using now, apparently the whiskey 20 years ago is leagues better than what they're producing now. And if I dare say this before we've even tried it, this has the potential to be like an all-time great pour for us, Brad.
Yeah, I mean, it won't take much to move up from our last review of Blanton's, unfortunately. But, I mean, so far, the color and the aroma on this are banging.
I don't think I've ever seen a whiskey as dark as this, Brad. This is like...
Yeah.
This is insanely dark whiskey.
Yeah, it is beautifully dark. Like, it's just got this nice... It's almost like a red ale. like without any foam. It's got this like reddish coloring to it that you just don't often see in whiskey. And I am super impressed.
About a year ago, we did a bonus episode with Old Dominick Distillery, and they sent us a cordial that they make called the Memphis Toddy. And I am just about to polish off my bottle of that. I absolutely love it. Brad, the nose on this reminds me so much of that. Like there is just so much citrus and orange and honey on this. It's almost like an old fashioned in a glass. This nose is, I mean, like the classic bourbon notes you get are probably like the third, fourth, fifth thing you smell on this. This is incredibly complex. I'm just going to come out and say I'm going to give this nose a 9.5 out of 10.
Yeah, I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10, Bob. I think that you have a lot of just depth to this nose. Like I can pull in a long draw and sit with that scent for like 10, 15 seconds before it really goes away. Like you said, there's a lot of citrus going on here, but for me, it feels almost like a beautiful fruit note coming through as well. Like almost like a plum, a raisin, like kind of one of those darker fruits. I feel like I'm getting some of that vanilla, some of that caramel. There's a spiciness to this that I'm just loving. I can't get over it, man. This is a phenomenal nose.
Now, before you take a sip, I will remind you, because this is straight from the barrel, that means barrel strength. So this thing clocks in at 133.5 proof, Brad. We are in for a really hot whiskey here, so just prepare yourself for that.
This is hands down the hottest whiskey we've ever done then.
Close. We've done a few in the 130s, so it's probably top 4 for sure. We'd have to like parse it out from there. But Brad, if it's as good as the nose, I'm really looking forward to it. Let's give it a sip.
Wow, that is some whiskey, Bob.
Oh, it keeps building after you swallow too.
Yeah, it does.
However, Brad, I think that my old-fashioned note is really, really on point here. And, it may just be because I'm really attuned to that today. I cracked open one of those bottles of proof syrup that we got like last season to make an old-fashioned today. And so that kind of like orange and maraschino cherry is just, it's on my mind right now. And that is what I'm picking up here on the taste. It is really viscous, really, really thick whiskey. It's hot and there's a lot of oak and there's a lot of pepper. But the two dominant notes I'm getting are like orange peel and cherry. And it carries all the way through. Man, Brad, this is really good.
Yeah, Bob, there is just all sorts of everything going on here. I think one of the things I love about it is that the power of the alcohol doesn't destroy the flavors. Mm-hmm. Like a lot of times when I talk about like eating wings, I like to say that I enjoy spiciness as long as it doesn't overwhelm flavor, right? That like when you talk about the blazing wings, there's no point in eating those because it's just so hot that it destroys any amount of flavor that you could get on your tongue. And I was honestly worried about that with this 133.99999 proof. Like I was just a little bit worried about it overpowering any good amount of flavor. But like you said, there is some beautiful stuff going on here. And at the core of it, I'm getting vanilla and caramel, which is what I want out of a bourbon. But layered on top of that are all sorts of other notes that are just impressive. I'm really enjoying this. I think I'm going to stick it a 9 on the taste as well.
Yeah, I'm in the same place as you. It's just the slightest step down from the nose. And that takes us to finish. Brad, I think the finish is spectacular on this. Like it has an incredibly great Kentucky hug on the way down, as you would expect from 133 proof. However, it is less harsh, less alcohol-y than that regular Blanton single barrel that we tried. And It is like 40 proof points higher than that. To be able to craft a finish that is as enjoyable as this one is at the proof point that this is, I mean, this drinks like Old Forester 1920, which is like 116 proof. And we're talking something that's in the 130s. Brad, this is like a lights out great finish.
If I was told that 133 proof whiskey could be smooth on the finish, I think I would have laughed at you right in the face. But this is smooth. It's oaky. You get a little bit of that spiciness on the end, those baking spices that I'm really enjoying. I just love this finish. I think it's better than the rest of the whiskey. I'm going to give it a 9.5.
And that takes us to overall balance. I'm just going to come out and say it like this, Brad. This is the best whiskey I've had on this show since we did the BTAC at the end of last season. And it's not even really close in my opinion. For a whiskey to be a 9.5, 9, and 9.5, that tells me that this is a pretty spectacularly balanced whiskey. And honestly, when it comes to just trying to find fault with the balance or the complete ride that your palate goes on here, I can't find a single flaw with this. I think this is a perfectly balanced whiskey. I'm going to give it a 10 out of 10 on balance.
I'm right there with you, Bob. 10 out of 10.
All right, Brad, that takes us to our value score. Now, this is where things get weird because obviously this bottle is 20 years old almost and comes from a bygone era in Buffalo Trace's history. I don't know that Blanton Straight from the Barrel tastes anything like this anymore. And because it is a single barrel, we may have just gotten one of the best barrels ever made and the rest of it tastes horrible. Who knows? It's hard to recommend things with this many variables. But I will say this. If you can find a bottle of Blanton Straight from the Barrel at anything even approaching MSRP, which is $120, I would say if you could find a bottle of this for double MSRP at $240, it is a no-brainer, pull the trigger, 10 out of 10 value. But, like I said, there's too many variables to come down strongly on a 10 out of 10. I need some help here, Brad. What are you thinking about the value?
I think that Buffalo Trace sucks. I think that they should go kick rocks. I think that they need to find a better way of making whiskey that isn't so allocated. I think that they should care about their consumers more. All that being said, I'll give it a 7.5 on value because it's so damn hard to find. If you're paying over $300 for it, don't. Stop supporting Buffalo Trace. Like stop putting out money for this stuff when it really doesn't deserve it. The problem is the whiskey that's in the barrel actually does deserve it because I hate to say it, but they make really good whiskey. They just need to do a better job of not being assholes about it. So I'll give it a 7.5. I think if you can find it for 120 to 200, yep, it's like a 9 to 10 out of 10 of value. But what you're going to find it at isn't that. And so I'll give it a 7.5.
Well, let me ask it this way, Brad. The sample that we just had from the barrel that was poured out in 2002, if this was sitting on the shelf at $500, what kind of value is it? Because I'm still tempted to say this is like a 9 to a 10 out of 10 at 500. Brad, this is either the best or the second best whiskey we've ever had on this show.
Yeah. $500, I think I would give it an 8. 7.5 to an 8 on value.
Yeah. So
I just think that $500 is a ridiculous amount of money. But there's part of me that goes, well, the person who can spend $500 on a whiskey probably doesn't even blink at it. So maybe for them it is a 10 out of 10. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, listen, we each just had an ounce apiece. So you're talking like what, 1/25 of the bottle, right? I mean, so you're talking like a $25 amount of whiskey if it's a $500 bottle, and it's a 48 out of 10 on that scale if this is being sold for $25 an ounce.
Yeah,
I'm gonna give the label itself, Straight from the Barrel, an 8 out of 10 on value, provided you can find it for less than double its asking price. And Brad, that is putting me out to an astronomically high 45.5 out of 50. What are you coming out to?
Bob, I am coming to a 45 out of 50.
That takes us to a 90.5 out of 100, or a 45.25, meaning this is only the third whiskey ever to break the 45 or a 90 out of 100 mark on this podcast. If you can find Blanton Straight from the Barrel, pick it up. Like I have no objections. I have no qualms. Buffalo Trace has temporarily redeemed themselves in my eyes because of what I just drank.
Nah, dude, forget Buffalo Trace. They can go kick rocks.
But okay,
Buffalo
fine.
Trace from 20 years ago, maybe. I might be down with them. But Buffalo Trace from now, sponsor us or go kick rocks.
We do want to say just an insane amount of thank yous to Bourbon and Stuff for sharing this with us. This is, Brad, I mean, this is in the top 5 best whiskeys I've ever had.
Yeah, Bourbon and Stuff, you are forever exalted in film and whiskey history as one of the most generous, kind, devoted human beings in existence. Thank you very much.
All right, Brad, let's ride this wave of positivity back into Order of the Phoenix. What do you say?
Let's get to it.
All right, that was Blanton straight from the barrel, one of the best whiskeys we've ever had, just bar none. And we are getting back into talking about Order of the Phoenix. Brad, as I look at my notes here, I recognize that I am being overwhelmingly negative about this movie, that I am ultimately going to come out on the positive side on. So maybe it would be best to just let me get my gripes out now, and then we can finish out the episode saying some nice things.
Yeah, I was planning on having a cup of tea tonight, so I'm going to go put the water on, steep it, do some stuff. Are you good here for a little bit?
I will hold down the fort.
Okay. All right. Have fun, dude.
All right. Gripe number 1. This movie has characters and introductions to characters that have absolutely no weight whatsoever. Out of nowhere, a whole bunch of people just come to Harry's, aunt and uncle's house and rescue him, and he's just like, oh, hey. And it's characters we've never seen before, who are never given a proper introduction, and then when they all die in later movies, we're expected to have some sort of attachment to them. That's first strike against this movie. Secondly, on the David Yates not having his footing yet, there is a voiceover that lasts probably like 4.5 minutes of this movie where Harry is narrating stuff to Sirius. And never in the Harry Potter movies up to this point have we had any sort of voiceover like that. And to me, it just says like, I don't know how to film this, but I need to get this crucial information into the movie. Hey, let's have a voiceover. It really bothers me. Third, and maybe most important, and this was like the most profane note that I wrote, it was just, in all caps, holy shit, why is Grop so poorly animated? Brad, I think that of all the Harry Potter movies, this one might have the worst CGI of all of them. And that is saying a lot because the 2001 CGI from Sorcerer's Stone was so bad. But like there are very crucial moments of this movie where the green screening is horrible. Like when they're in the Ministry of Magic and looking back through those racks and racks of prophecies, you can tell sometimes like the lighting is off and it's just very obviously on a green screen. And I was really shocked revisiting this movie at how bad some of the visual effects looked. And then finally, Brad, this is just a really small nitpick. When Voldemort comes out and he's talking to Dumbledore and Harry, and he just has that line where he's like, and you shall be dead. It was the most unintentional laughter moment, I think, maybe of all the Harry Potter movies, except for maybe when Voldemort gives Draco a hug in the last movie. But like super cringeworthy dialogue at that point. And I think ultimately just leading me to reaffirming that this might be my least favorite of all the Harry Potter movies. Those are my 4 big gripes right now that I wanted to get off my chest. Brad, I do want to hear, do you have any gripes with this movie? Any nitpicks?
Oh, hey, I just got my oolong. Are you good? How's everything going?
I'm here. I'm good.
Awesome. The biggest nitpick that I have with this movie is actually the final like 30, 40 minutes of the movie once they go to the Ministry of Magic. I think that for the most part in this movie, Yates handles the just avalanche of content decently well. Not perfectly, but decently well. But when it comes down to the Ministry of Magic, I just think he absolutely botches it. The ending of the book of Order of the Phoenix is so fascinating and interesting and intricate, and it builds the world of Harry Potter in the middle of this like important action sequence that the way he handles it feels rushed.
Yeah.
It feels poorly improvised. The battle between Dumbledore and Voldemort is supposed to be this like massive, huge spectacle of the two greatest wizards of our time and possibly that have ever lived dueling it out. And I think that Rowling does a great job of demonstrating that in the books. And then Yates takes it and just, I don't know, it feels like he waters it down.
Yeah.
And he waters it down with things like people are just like turning into ghost shadows and flying around, which we haven't really seen before.
Yeah.
There's just a lot of stuff going on. And if you want to like get into the technical stuff, like I'm okay with him getting rid of like the specific words sometimes. Like sometimes you see them and hear them say stupefy. But other times you see them just whip their wand and a spell like flings out. I'm okay with that. I think it's okay at this point in the movie universe to say, we all know how spellcasting works. We can just assume that it's happening at this point. Mm-hmm. But when you have people flying around like ghosts and the bad guys are black ghosts and the good guys are white ghosts, like it's just a little bit over the top. It feels cheap. And then at the end of it, it's like Sirius, he disarms Lucius and blasts him away, and he turns to Harry and he gives him an award-winning Gary Oldman smile for like 5 seconds.
For way too long. Yeah.
And then Bellatrix in the middle of this combat just goes, Avada Kedavra! And you see him just kind of like go, oh no, I've been shot.
Yeah.
like it's stuff like that for me, the emotional impact of this book is in the last 100 to 200 pages when they're in the Department of Mysteries and they're learning more about the world and they're finding out like the world of magic is a lot more wild than any of us could have ever imagined. And Yates just kind of craps on that and gives us a really subpar battle sequence that I was really pumped for.
Yeah, man.
So I think I just talked for like a solid 6 minutes. But that was me getting it off my chest that I think the end of this movie sucks. And unfortunately, I think it's literally the exact flip of Goblet of Fire. I think most of Goblet of Fire struggles. There's a few moments that are good, but he just nails the ending.
Yep.
He just knocks it out of the freaking park. And in this movie, I think he does a pretty good, admirable job with the first 3/4 of the movie. And he just flubs the landing.
Yeah, and it's really unfortunate because like I said earlier, I think that the meat of the movie is in the last 200 pages of the book or the last quarter of like the content. And if there's anything you really need to land, it is the ending, because while he does such an admirable job with the first, 3/4 of the movie, none of that stuff really matters. And I hate to break it down like that, stuff that matters, stuff that doesn't. But I think if we had our druthers, like we would prefer that he nails the ending here. And you're right, Brad, that Sirius's death sequence, it has just no weight to it. The way that Bellatrix even casts her spell, like it's the killings, like you're murdering someone. It's like the most accursed thing that there is. And she's just like, man, Avada Kedavra. And he goes, oof. And then he's gone. And before it even registers what's happened, he's like floating behind the sheet. And I remember in the book, she's describing it and you're like, oh my gosh, like it's really happening. Like he is passing through this veil. And it's just so poorly handled here. And a lot of that is because the area that they're actually dueling in, he does such a poor job of like having you understand the geography of what's going on. Like there's a point where the Death Eaters are doing their like ghost person thing and they're flying around some sort of moat. And you're like, where is this now? Like, where'd this ditch come from? And you're struggling. And it's so disorienting as a viewer to understand where people are that by the time Bellatrix kills Sirius, you're just like, all right, I guess like that happened now. So yeah, man, I'm on the same page as you. Brad, I think we've talked long enough about this movie. I do want to hear your final score. And just roughly, where does this one fall within the Harry Potter franchise in terms of your rankings?
I think I'll stick with what I said at the start with a slight variation. I'd probably put it at like the 5th or 6th best movie, like right in the middle on the backside. I really think that the second one is the worst of the 8. I honestly don't know. I know that you're going to ruffle some feathers here because I know you love it. I honestly just don't remember Half-Blood Prince enough to rank it at this point. So I'm excited to get back into that one because that's one of the few that I'm like, I really don't remember that movie at all. So TBD on that one. But yeah, I would probably put it in the middle. And I think with that in mind, I think I'll give it a 7.5 out of 10. I believe that I gave Goblet of Fire an 8 out of 10, and that's because they knocked the ending out of the freaking park. And I'll just lower it a half point because I still like this movie a lot, but the ending is just so rough for me that it's not quite as good as Goblet of Fire.
Yeah, Brad, I'm with you on almost everything you said. And in David Yates' defense, I think that this is one of the books that Rowling really mishandled as she was writing it. I think when you just look at it from a story standpoint, aside from Prisoner of Azkaban, which is a year in which Voldemort doesn't show up, like, this might be Voldemort's weakest attempt ever to kill Harry. He just kind of gives up on trying to kill Harry, and it doesn't make any sense. He has him right there. He decides to fly away. Then he possesses Harry just to prove a point to Dumbledore, like, hey, I can get inside of him. But if your goal is to kill him, he's right there. And it's just so convenient that he just decides, like, meh, I'll try next year, and flies away. I just had an image of like the Monty Python and the Holy Grail with everybody like saying get on with it, but instead of saying get on with it, like kill him already. Right. He's like writhing in pain and Voldemort says, I've proven my point, and just flies away. And so again, like that is not David Yates' fault. And I have always felt like this whole chapter in the Harry Potter saga always felt to me like J.K. Rowling stretched half of a book idea into a full book. Like, it doesn't even feel like this is really a full year in the life of Harry Potter. They spend the whole year trying to convince people that Voldemort's back. And they're like, nah. And then Voldemort comes back and they're like, oh, he's back. And then the end. That's essentially the synopsis of this book. And so I think that from the get-go, this was kind of a doomed production because I just think it's a really weak entry in the series overall, aside from those world-building elements that you talked about, Brad. But you guys, you've heard me ramble on about this movie. I think it's the weakest one of the whole 8-film series, except maybe for number 7, which we'll look at next season. Brad, I wanted to give it a 7 out of 10 because that's what I gave Goblet of Fire, and I think they are kind of on similar footing, like you said, just reversed, where the first half of Goblet of Fire sucked, the second part of this movie sucked. But I honestly think this is a worse movie than Goblet of Fire. And I can't believe I'm going to do this. I'm going to give this a 6.5 out of 10. Still positive. Like, I still think it is a worthwhile movie to watch. But that brings our average out to about a 7 out of 10. And that's where I think this movie belongs. It just doesn't reach the heights of some of the other ones for me.
Yeah, which is sad because I feel like the Goblet of Fire has a lot of just really weird gaffes to it that just don't fit the Harry Potter universe. But somehow, I think I'd agree with you. It ends up being a better movie. I will say I actually have an award for this movie, Bob.
Oh, let's hear it. Let's wrap up with the award.
It's a continuation of my Why the Hell Is He in This Movie award. And I think I'm going to give it to the rest of the Harry Potter movies. The award goes to Michael Gambon. He did not deserve to play Dumbledore. He never read the character. He did not read the books. He literally does not deserve to play the part of Dumbledore. I think that in this entry, he does an especially poor job with it. Whether or not it's Yates directing him or Newell, at this point, you can tell that he just doesn't give a rip about what Dumbledore really stands for, what he's all about. I think he is incredibly terrible in this entry in the Harry Potter universe. So, Michael Gambon, you can go kick some stinking rocks.
I think that is the third person and or entity that you have told to kick rocks this episode. So, on that note, Brad, we want to know what Film and Whiskey Nation thinks of this movie. Are we right? I mean, is this one of the weaker entries in the saga, or do you think this is like the best of them all? You can reach out to us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram @FilmWhiskey.
Yeah, or leave us a voicemail. Let your voice be heard on the Film and Whiskey podcast. You can do that on our website, which is anchor.fm/filmwhiskey.
Next week, we're looking at Harry Potter number 6, The Half-Blood Prince. I'm excited for that one, Brad. But until then, I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
We'll see you next time.